What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 796. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you know how much easier that just rolls off my tongue than from Las Vegas' Paul Chion? Even after like number of months, I'm so used to saying it because you've been in Denver for a long time now.
Yeah, it's 13 years, you know, about as long as it gets, right?
Oh my God. I was going to say like 9 years or something. No. That's crazy. Because to me, that does still feel like not new, but you know, it feels like you're relatively new to Denver. I still think of you as a Californian, you know, like, but I guess you're like an official Denverite.
Denverite. Yeah. I also, in some ways, definitely think of myself as a Californian, but yeah, no, at this point, I think it's pretty clear that I live in Denver and my kids have all been born here and no plans to go anywhere. So yeah, it's a great place. I love Denver.
The Mile High City.
Plus, I got enough people to move here that it'd be kind of messed up.
I know.
So
it was like, it was a slow start, and then all of a sudden they all moved there from everywhere else. All right, we've got an interesting show this time. We were faced with a little bit of a challenge this time. So we're going to do the Aetherdrift Sunset show because it's time to say goodbye to it as we look forward to Tarkir coming out soon. But as you may know, Luis didn't get a chance to draft this set as much as he normally would. He was on his leave and was juggling all the children and his work responsibilities and stuff. And that meant, focusing on Cube so that he could continue to get his videos out when possible. But something had to give. And it was Aetherdrift. And I'm bummed about it because I think Luis would really like Aetherdrift as a set, but it wasn't like it was his choice. But it does make doing the Sunset show a little tricky because it's pretty in-depth, and realistically, you have to have drafted the set kind of a lot before you kind of get into the weeds of some of the more niche things that we talk about on the Sunset show. So we're going to flip it around a little bit, and we're going to use the Sunset show as a way to Luis to kind of ask me questions about the set in the loose framework of how we do the Sunset show. So it'll be a way for us to put, a cap on this, to say goodbye to it, to give it its proper respect, to complain about it in the ways that we want to complain about it, but it'll be just a little different than our normal Sunset show. We also have preview cards from Tarkir. So we're going to be going over those in just a moment here. Before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources, and you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, as well as access to behind the scenes stuff. We do a live stream. Like right now, we are streaming this recording to the people watching. That also goes up as a YouTube video because we stream it on YouTube, and you can watch it even if you weren't literally at your computer or phone at the time that we were recording, and see all the behind the scenes stuff. And it acts as like maybe a little earlier way to look at the show. You also get the behind the scenes full recording with the show notes at certain levels of it. And you also get access to the Patreon feed. So a bunch of cool stuff over there. And thanks, everybody, for supporting us there. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard. They make the best stuff in the business. We're talking deck boxes, sleeves, binders, backpacks, all of it. If you need ways to protect your cards, your decks, and your collection, you're going to find it at Ultimate Guard. You can check out their latest and greatest stuff at ultimateguard.com. And you can pick up their products from your favorite local game store or your favorite online retailer. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. Let's do one last crack-a-pack here, Luis. I am curious where you will land on this.
Totally.
Let me just bring it up 1 second. And there it is. Okay, so our first card out is Rugged Highlands. This one of the early hints that we got, Luis, that this set could be on the slower side, though I'll be honest, I didn't buy it for a second. I was still very much of the mentality that this was going to be a set as fast as the ones for the last few years. But Gainlands were in this set, and those have typically been in sets that played out slower, both for the fact that, they lean you maybe in the direction of splashing a little bit more, but also the one life that you get for playing it does add up.
Yeah, I always love when these lands are in sets, and they're just very pushed. Like you might not think it's much, but one life is a really big game, and just having a bunch of these in your deck just buys you a little bit of extra time, as well as obviously enabling splashes.
Right. If you were able to get, there are formats where you would routinely play numerous of these where you're starting at, average starting life total is probably closer to 22 than it was to 20 in the decks that are running 5, 6 of these or whatever. In this format, they didn't play such a pivotal role, but they come up and that life gain does matter. Next is Voyager Quick Welder. That's a 2/4 for 2 and a white that makes your other artifacts spells cheaper. And it is also an artifact. Good stats, seemed pushed, was kind of meh.
Yeah, this card, like I said, it's not like I've played the set none, and this card has impressed me in some games, but obviously it's a little bit like a mana dork without the capability of having the actual nut draw that often. So
right, exactly.
If you need another artifact, it's fine. If you have 5s you want to play, it's fine, but it's not a card I'm gonna, go super out of my way to try and play.
Yeah, it's sort of a super affinity enabler. It's good blocker down on the ground. It's an artifact. It sort of doubles up for affinity. But the problem is there's only a few cards with affinity in this set. It was a very light touch. It wasn't a core theme. Next is Guidelight Optimizer. This guy ended up seeing a lot of play. The 2/1 that taps for blue, but you can only use it for artifacts or abilities. But it turns out, there was a lot of artifacts in blue and particularly blue-white. And then abilities, it counted for exhaust. And that was a big deal.
Yeah, and if you had like a blue-white or blue-black deck, this could play your like Pactol Terrors on turn 3, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Exhaust is a really fun mechanic. That's one of the better ones in the set for sure.
Definitely, and we will talk about that. Deathless Pilot. This is the 1 in a black 2/2 that you can buy back. Pretty mediocre, without a really strong sacrifice sub theme. There was like a couple of cards that said sacrifice on them, but it wasn't a core piece of the puzzle. A card like Deathless Pilot is pretty inefficient, even in a relatively slow format. I think in a normal modern format, this card would just be nothing. But in this format, it was just on that fringe. It was a 24th, 25th card, but I was never a particular fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've liked it in like black green, like self-mill sort of stuff.
And even then you're like,
even in a slow format, paying 4 mana to draw 2/2 is not really where you want to be at. Like it can come up, but it's not the best thing.
This next card is super interesting. Lightning Strike.
Yeah.
This has to be one of the worst Lightning Strike formats ever, maybe ever. Still totally playable, don't get me wrong. But, there's not a lot of formats that you could think of recently, and I mean like last few years, where Lightning Strike wouldn't be the best common or really right up there with one of the best commons.
Certainly you'd expect it to be the best red common.
Right, and it's not even that. Instead, it's a freaking 5-drop, yeah. But it's still good, and it still, gets picked relatively highly. This is probably on the short list of cards that are picked higher than their return gives you. It's Lightning Strike. Like, I'm not going to pass it.
It has that. It's kind of like it has that price memory that it's, everyone knows it's Lightning Strike. So
yes,
they're gonna always want to take it.
Light Wheel Enhancements. This is the white aura that puts on a vehicle or a creature, and it has start your engines, and it gets the thing bigger, and you can play it from your graveyard if you have max speed. Super missed. I just had no place in the format.
There, like Circo said last week, this is the kind of card that it's pretty neat, and sometimes you end up being able to use this card in the right kind of deck, but it is not the card that you really want in this format. Like, it doesn't quite do it.
Excuse me. One of the things that he mentioned was when we've seen cards like this in the past, they've had an additional bonus of being like in a set that cared about things being targeted. And in this set, that isn't the case. And also it's random just to have it be an aura, an enchantment. There was a, reasonable artifact sub theme going, but that this type of card type doesn't really fit into that. And so they made it into an aura, but there's no benefits for that. Next is Venom Saklagak. This is everybody knows. This is one of the green 2/1 Death Touch that can get saddled up. This is a high-performing green 2-drop. This thing basically never got cut and was in every single deck that it got drafted, and it got picked higher than you might think. It looks like a pretty run-of-the-mill common, but it was actually a bit better than that.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it could always trade on defense and often on offense, they can't really put one thing in front of it. A 2/4 death touch is really hard to kill.
Right.
Plus, it's just a 2-drop that's good at different stages of the game. It just does kind of all those things, and it counts for amount for the various cards that really care about that, your run overs and whatnot.
Yeah, and run over was the combo with it, cheap and it has death touch, so really turned it into a kill all. Next, definitely the most disappointing green common, Alacrian Jaguar. That's the 5-drop, and it did not perform well. There's a very sharp cliff where this card comes in, and the cards before it are quite good. So that was jank. And then we've got a foil. It's Scrap Compactor. That's the 1 mana artifact that you can do 3 damage for 3 mana, tap sack it, or 6 tap sack it to destroy a creature or vehicle. Just on that bare fringe of playability. This is, to me, the type of card that you would play occasionally in some decks that either needed it or could take advantage of the fact that it was an artifact. But in any deck that had access to actual removal, you would much prefer not to play the Scrap Compactor. But I gotta say, they did finally just kind of hit, like, it's cheap, it's only 1 mana, 3 mana to kill, to do 3 damage. Basically always left you behind on the transaction. You would have invested 4 mana. And then also the fact that it's only sorcery speed in the sense that you have to play the Scrap Compactor first, so they always know that it's coming, etc., etc. It was extremely difficult to be ahead on the transaction. And Luis, while you were gone, I kind of made a new litmus test that I've been using a lot, which is comparing one shortcut in the modern era, I think, where tempo is kind of king, is to say, if I play this creature and my opponent uses a 1 or 2 mana removal spell on it, how do I feel? If they use a 3 or 4 mana removal spell on it, how do I feel? And then anything above that. And what you end up finding out pretty quickly, it really explains why things have changed the way they have changed. And the reason why cards like Murder and stuff are down on the pecking order is that if you're the one holding the Murder, yes, you can get ahead in the transaction if you kill their 5-drop or their 6-drop. So that's why those cards still see play at all. But anytime you kill something that costs 3 or even worse, 2 or 1 mana, it feels really bad. Like you are actually falling behind. And so, when we ask ourselves, well, why don't we play all these, like this 5-drop looks really good, why doesn't it see play? This 4-drop looks really good, why doesn't it see play? And it's like, well, if your opponent kills it with a Murder, they're ahead. And it's like, well, why does this 1-drop outperform everything? And it's like, because if your opponent kills it with a Murder, they're still behind, right? And I know Murder isn't the only removal spell, but it really does explain why there's been this skew towards the cheaper removal spells and the cheaper creatures, is that you are the one with the liability if you're running out the 5-drop that doesn't really do anything. And then on the other side, you're the one with the liability if you're trying to play Murder in a format full of 1-drops. And Scrap Compactor is basically on the bad side of that no matter what. And so
there's just no way to get an advantage with this card.
Right.
Like,
how do you get ahead?
You could even kill something big with this, which can be nice. But if you're doing that, you're spending 7 mana total. Like,
right.
They've made this card up many times, and they're going to trick us one day. It's not going to be today, but there's going to be a set that comes out, and the version of this, kind of like the trap in Bloomburrow, right? The 1 mana sack deal 3 or whatever, or in Ikoria or in whatever. Like, there's just like so many of these. They're going to play one, they're print one that's like a little different and like exactly like now gets over the line, and you're like, oh, this card's actually good.
Totally. Totally. And we've seen that brings up an interesting shift that we've seen as well. And the one in this set is a great example with Ride's End of, there's been that type of card for a while, right? Like kill something, but if it's tapped or attacking, then make it cheaper. But those have gotten better, over the last stretch of time because people are attacking more and because there's an absolute premium on the removal being cheaper. So, I agree. We'll keep our eye out for it. What is going to be the card that finally gets a Scrap Compactor over the finish line? Uncommons, Amonkhet Raceway. This is the land that has start your engine, so it's like the easiest way to get your engines going. It taps for colorless, and if you have max speed, you can tap it to give a creature haste until end of turn. I just never find room for these colorless lands that don't just do a thing no matter what, and that thing has to be pretty dang good.
Yeah, this card, I certainly have not played with it or against it in any meaningful capacity.
Right. This is definitely one that if somebody played, I'd be like, which one is that? Because there's a few versions of this. Next card, man, this is like Luis Scott-Vargas dream card. Stock Up. This is like the best divination ever.
Stock Up is so good.
It's so good. Look at the top 5 and get 2 of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom. It's like crazy good.
Stock Up is seeing play in like vintage in cube and basically every sort of thing. Oh, it's a great card in cube.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, this is the mini. What's it called? What am I thinking of?
Dig Through Time?
Yeah, Dig Through Time.
It's Dig Through Time for 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's crazy. Definitely would be my pick out of this pack. I mean, we haven't had that much to look at. Venom Sac, Lagak, or Lightning Strike are the only cards that have really stood out, but Stock Up would be it. Next is Broodheart Engine, another great one. This is green-black for an artifact, the ones that let you surveil one on your upkeep, and then you can pay 4 mana tap and sacrifice it to return a creature or vehicle at sorcery speed from your graveyard back to the battlefield. Awesome card. This to me is a poster child for this set in many ways, not only because it's green-black and those ended up being the headliner colors, but also because the fact that this card is good tells you everything you need to know about what's going on in this format. Like the fact that you can just take turn 2 off, that turn 3 it does almost nothing. Right? Like these
probably doesn't even do anything on turn 4.
It probably doesn't even on turn 4 unless you get lucky, and it's still excellent, where I'll tell you, man, like if you had never touched this set and you just said, oh, I woke up from, taking care of the twins for 4 months or whatever. The last set I drafted was Foundations and, Bloomborough or whatever. And I said, here's Broodheart Engine. I mean, your assumption would be like, this is crap. Like I'm not going to play something on 2 that does nothing. Then it takes forever to get going. And then I need to have a target for it to get something back. And that thing has to be better than all the 6 mana that I've invested in this somehow. Like nothing about this card looks good. It looks exactly like the type of card that we would like, but then give a D. And instead it's like a B. So
yeah, no, this card's been great for me. Like I said, drafting Black Green has been very fun. And that card has been quite good in that deck.
Pit Automaton. This is the Matt Nass special here. 2 mana 0/4 Defender. It taps to add double colorless, but you can only activate abilities with it, and you can pay 2 tap and double your next exhaust ability.
Yeah. In the right deck, it can do some things. The fact that it's an 0/4 is okay, though obviously the format's not like so much about that, blocking with 0/4s. But any permanent that taps for 2 mana, I mean, that is a pretty big game.
It is, yeah, and it can block enough, etc. Yeah, this is a light build around, some card that you could put into your deck every once in a while. Our rare is actually a mythic. We get to end on a mythic. It is Mimeoplasm Revered One. That's the blue, green, black X00 legendary ooze. And when it enters, you exile up to X creature cards from your graveyard, and it enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature card exiled this way. And then you can pay 2 to make the Mimeoplasm a copy of target creature that it exiled, but it keeps that ability and stays at 0/0.
This was my first pick of the format.
Oh, nice. I played it yesterday. So we bookended it. Yeah.
It's a sweet card.
Yeah, it is a sweet card. And, there's a few sweet spots. I mean, this format can go long, so you could make it really, really big. I did. Yesterday, I made an X = 7. So I had a 21/21 Mimeoplasm. And here's the cool part. I had 2 creatures. I had 7 creatures, but the 2 important creatures were, one of them had Trample and one of them had Death Touch. So I turned it sideways and I said, you decide. Like if you're going to chump block it, I'm going to give it Trample. And if you're going to try to stack block on it to try to save a bunch of damage or to try to kill it, God forbid, because they actually did have enough to block it, I'm going to give it Death Touch and just wipe your board. Unfortunately, you can't do both at the same time, but you can choose. And my opponent opted to block with every creature they had, which was 9 creatures, totaling something like 30 power and toughness. And I turned it into an engine rat and wiped their board, which was better for them than the alternative, which was dying because they were at 8 and they would have taken it. But yeah, anyway, Mimeoplasm was pretty cool. I do not have it nearly in the same category as Broodheart Engine or Stock Up because of the mana requirements and all of that stuff. I would take Stock Up out of this pack. I think Stock Up and Broodheart Engine are very close, but single color definitely beats out two highly contested colors, I think, in this case. What do you think?
Yeah, that is my inclination as well. Mimeoplasm is fun, but I don't even know how much better Mimeoplasm is than Broodheart or Stock Up, and just adding every color you add makes it that much less likely you're going to play it in your deck. So
yeah,
look, if you can first pick a Stock Up, that is a format that I'm into. It just so happens the timing on this one didn't quite line up, but yeah, Stock Up's a great card.
Stock Up's a great card. Yeah, I mean, and I will say that even if I put this under the late format, I'm looking to do stuff I haven't done, I'm looking to force some stuff, I would still take Stock Up. Like it is the spikiest pick, but it's also just like an enabler for everything I want to do. Yeah.
What decks are you trying to go into when you Stock Up?
Well, so my thought process would be blue-green. That's my favorite deck in the format. It's my most often drafted deck as well. And while Stock Up doesn't have any particular application, I don't think in really any deck, like you're not drawing the card, so like it doesn't even trigger those. But it's the best enabler basically you can get. It lets you find the things that you want, and blue-green exhaust is where I'd want to be for sure. Okay. That's our Cracker Pack. Let's go over our preview cards for the next set. And then we'll talk about Aetherdrift. So we actually got 6 of them this time, Luis. It's kind of crazy. We got a full cycle of 5 commons, all with the same kind of theme to them. And then, an extra card that fits the overall theme as well. So our first card is Caustic Exhale. So this is black for an instant at common. And it says it has Behold a Dragon. So this is a thing. It says to behold a dragon, choose a dragon you control or reveal the dragon card from your hand. And this is a mechanic that we've seen in the past. It just didn't have that name yet. So it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, behold a dragon or pay 1. So it's either black or black and 1, depending on the dragon situation. And it says target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Dang, that's a really good removal spell.
Yeah, I mean, 1 in a black instant, give a creature -3/-3. Like we were just talking about how Lightning Strike may not be, quite as good as it used to be and all that. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking 2 mana deal, kind of remove a 3 toughness creature, that's still really good. And this is just going to cost 1 mana sometimes.
Totally. I mean, how do you play around that? And it's common. Anyway, these are all common, by the way, and they're all answers is what I would say. Most of them are removal except for the blue cards, but they're all ways to answer, and they all have Behold a Dragon for different costs. So the next one is called Dispelling Exhale. This is 1 in a blue for an instant, and it says you can behold a dragon. As additional cost of spell, you may behold a dragon, counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, but if you did the dragon thing, they have to pay 4 instead. So it's kind of it's a mana leak without ever actually being a mana leak. It straddles both sides of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a quench / mana leak. But as we've seen, 2 mana to make them counter unless they pay 2 is not so bad. Like there's formats where that works out really nicely. And then there's, the option to make them pay 4. So it's actually still a pretty good counter in like the mid game if you have ways to, get a dragon in your hand or whatever, which in this set, I imagine is not going to be the most difficult. Mm-hmm. And the combination of being good early and maybe still good in mid or even late game, you counter a 5-drop pretty easily, I would say.
Yeah.
That I think adds up quite enough for me to want to play this card. Like this card, Same. I think is going to be pretty good.
I do too. I've, these type of cards, these cheap interactive cards for the reasons we talked about before have gone up. And this one actually has some pretty, hard counter vibes if you're doing the dragon thing at all. Next is Molten Exhale. This is 1 in a red for a sorcery. And it says you may cast this spell as though it had flash if you behold a dragon and it's an additional cost to cast it. So this one might be instant speed. And it does 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Man, they are not messing around with these removal spells. Like these are hardcore. No, 4 damage for 2 mana?
Yeah, I mean, 2 mana deal 4 used to be an uncommon, and this is now a common that's going to have flash some amount of the time.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That's crazy. This seems like I'm kind of excited just seeing these cards already, because these are excellent answers. And these are the types of cards that you need to combat really quick formats and push it more towards the mid-range or even the slow end of things. So I like what I'm seeing here. Next one is Osseous Exhale. This is 1 and a white for an instant. And it says, this just has Behold a Dragon. You can, as an additional cost if you want. And it does 5 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And if you did the Behold a Dragon thing, you gain 2 life. Man, aggro decks, they're going to have a tough time in this format.
Yeah, I mean, these are even pretty good against like a mid-range deck. Like, this is just a great card. Obviously, aggro gets the most punished by the 2 life part, but these are not weak.
Right, 5 damage. And yes, they do need to be attacking or blocking, but these type of spells, when you can do either, that usually works out well. You're going to find yourself in a scenario. They're much worse if you're trying to be the aggressor. Like, letting your opponent block and then kill their guy is not, that is a good way to fall behind in a game. But if you're trying to play defense, it's good, and you'll take the other mode just as a throw-in. Piercing Exhale is the green one. It's 1 and a green for an instant, and as additional cost, you can Behold a Dragon. It says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. So we already have just straight up, what's it called? Bite.
Instant speed, rapid bite, yeah.
Yeah, rapid bite and instant speed. And then if you do the dragon thing, you get to surveil too. Man.
So all these are pushed. They all seem great. I would say that probably the biggest swings are like Dispelling Exhale goes from doing nothing to being a hard counter sometimes if you have the dragon. Caustic Exhale being castable, being at 1 instead of 2 is obviously an upside, but it's still just, that's not like the biggest gain. Getting to cast the red one at flash speed is pretty great. And then 2 life is pretty good. Surveil, those are just kind of like feel goods, but I think the blue one is the one where you're going to see the biggest swing about whether you consistently have a dragon in hand or in play.
Yeah, I agree. Because the thing is, both Caustic and Molten are just good enough. Like, you just don't care.
Yeah.
And then we got one extra card. It is another removal spell, but it does not have Behold a Dragon.
Cost.
Yeah, and it does not have Exhale on it. It's worthy cost. It is black for a sorcery at common, and it says additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, and you exile a creature or planeswalker. So this is a card we've seen. Exile's great, but additional cost to cast means that you need to kind of set it up, you know.
Sorry, I'm still tripped up. I don't know if this is the card that's going to print, but they misspelled survival in the flavor text.
Did they really?
The first part is victory survival, and then the second part says, I'll always ensure your survival.
Does it? Oh, it does. I wonder, we should let them know. Or maybe we shouldn't.
They know by now if this is true.
Wow, that's rough. We'll mention it. Would you pay the worthy cost? I mean, these type of cards are usually close to playable, but here's the thing. The thing to look for is, what can I sacrifice? And in this, it's just a creature. A lot of times it'll be like, or an artifact, and then, you'll find a treasure or a clue or a food or something like that doesn't block attack, or that, you don't absolutely have to have. If it's just sacrifice a straight up creature, yes, you might be able to find a token or something that's locked down under something, but that's a lot steeper of an opening cost. Still, it's cheap, and it does get to exile the thing that you hit, and that's pretty good.
Yeah. These kinds of cards are always completely context dependent. Like, every card is to some degree, of course, but I'm not that worried about whether Molten Exile is going to be good. It's going to be good unless this format is completely bizarre. Whereas worthy cost, in some formats, this will be a good card. In some formats, it's going to be pretty mediocre or too bad. But It just kind of depends. And it's also kind of cool because it's nice that there's, the black removal spell that everyone wants, the -3/-3. Mm-hmm. But then there's worthy cost, which some decks like white-black, for example, I don't really know what the color combinations are doing, but let's say white-black that often has a sacrifice theme, they want this and no one else does. And that's a cool part of the texture of the format as well.
Totally. And, big question, is there a common threaten? That type of stuff comes up too for a red-black sacrifice deck where you could steal their creature and then basically throw it at them. I'm impressed. We got a killer cycle here. Yeah. These are amazingly powerful for very cheap. They all cost 2 mana, and except of the exile of the exhale cycle. And then Caustic can even cost 1 under the right circumstance. These are very cheap, very powerful removal spells, and they give me a lot of hope for that format, to be honest, of it being, again, somewhere in the mid-range, maybe even on the slower side of things, just because it feels very very hostile to cheap creature decks to be able to get through in that way. The other note is if one of these cards isn't very good, it's usually because the cards around it aren't that great. Like we talked about Lightning Strike. Red was just okay in that format, didn't have a whole lot of stuff going on, and Lightning Strike suffered as a result. Okay, let's talk about Aetherdrift. Luis, it is time to say goodbye to Aetherdrift. Again, you hardly knew Yi or something.
Yes, but, I really did.
but I got a good run with it. And I'll let you take the reins here on our sunset-ish discussion.
All right. I mean, so this is going to be kind of like a modified Sunset show. Of course, I have some experience with the set, but not enough to like really speak to like what's the card I always lose to sort of thing. But I'm kind of curious to get a perspective of Marshall, you, what does the show look or the set look like through kind of your eyes? And you got to start with, what is the set in one sentence?
Yeah, and that would be slow and low. That is the tempo. This is the first, major step towards slowness that we've seen in a long time. I keep an eye on this. It's been kind of a talking point on the show and stuff because the sets have, I always think about it in terms of like, what's the health of Booster Draft? And generally speaking, it's always really good because Booster Draft's such a strong experience and that it's kind of hard to screw it up too bad. But the one big note that I would have is that over the last, few years, that things have trended only in one direction and that we just haven't seen a lot of variability in the different types of formats. And, my usual talking point on this when it comes up is that the interesting archetypes that they put a lot of effort and time into, they just don't get to see the light of day. The black greens and the blue greens, those are very rarely the best archetypes. And many times they're unplayable. Like they're just like, there's so much cool stuff going on there with graveyard stuff or ramp or whatever. And it's just sort of laughable to think that you would play it. And interestingly, in this format, those are two of the best archetypes. So, something switched there and you could feel it. Drafting that, there wasn't that immediate pressure of I might miss my third land drop, I'm dead, or I didn't play anything on turn 2, I'm dead, or something like that. But that said, it didn't feel slow. Like this didn't feel like old school slow. It just felt like a step off of the pace that we've been on, which was a relief.
Yeah. I mean, it is nice to have a bit of variability when it comes to the speed of formats. And this one, I think, seemed like it hit a nice spot on the curve for you.
It did.
So kind of in that vein, especially when you're thinking in the kind of normal set format, like when we go into the set review, which we're going to be doing very soon here for Tarkir Dragonstorm. So don't worry, my inexperience with this set is not going to matter after today, pretty much. But when we go into the set review, I know how you and Paul did it, like basically kind of like me and you do it, but just a little bit worse. You go in thinking 2 mana plays are really important. A card like Stock Up, maybe some decks will want it, but it's not that good. A 4 mana card that doesn't really affect the board or maybe exchanges badly with removal, you can't play it. And that doesn't seem to be the case with this set in a variety of ways. We just saw that even with just that Crack-a-Pack, multiple cards that would get a pretty low rating in a lot of the kind of more tempo-based sets that today. So what were the biggest misses in the set review then? What did you guys look at and think this card's too slow or not good enough? Or this card's going to be great, and then just like I imagine, this is me not knowing, the 2 mana 2/2 with first strike on your turn, you guys probably thought was pretty good, and that card ended up being quite bad, right?
Definitely, and that was across the board, like across the entire board, we were off by pushing a letter grade for everything that looked aggressive and fast, and then in the other direction for all the slow, clunky stuff, the brute heart engines and stuff like that. We use the best context that we can for the set review, but we kind of have to go with what we know. And we talk about this too. I mean, it's not like we come in all like, we know everything about this set. It's like, these are your starting points, but this was probably the most off we've been in a long time. Like,
right. Cause I wasn't there.
Because you weren't there. Right. That was it. Paul poisoned the well.
It's so brutal because Paul really did both of us such a huge solid by being on the show.
He really did.
And then he's just getting sidewinded here. He's not even know about it.
Yeah. So bad. We're really bad friends. He did a great job with the context that we had, but it was wrong. And there was a few things that we were up on. We've had enough experience with vehicles, not to complain about them, about the card type, but just about how they actually play, to know, don't overrate these things. Like, they have to prove themselves to you. They're not just automatically good. That, the difference between crew 1, crew 2, crew 3, there's big chasms between each of those. And so we were all over that part of it. And I think appropriately docked the vehicles where we needed to. But dude, it's just like, looking back, I think I would have gone 0 for 5 on predicting the best common for each color. Like, I just would have missed all of them, and we'll talk about those. But, Stampeding Scurryfoot being the best common in the whole set, like, we liked it.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, we were like, that's cool. But it's like, that is not where I would have ended up at all, because those cards look slow. I mean, that's it. They just look slow. And anything that looked like it might be slow, I just was like, putting in its normal box of being too slow. So that was the big miss for sure, was just like trying to predict the speed of the format just isn't possible. Like, I do not have a sense for that until we actually start playing. And the good news is that, the format was about a turn slower than the stuff we've seen lately.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always, look, when it comes to the set reviews, I've always liked just going in blind. I did that with my written reviews. I did that. Like, we have adjusted a little, which I think is good, which is, do the gold cards first, read through like all the mechanics. At least I do that, and make sure I, kind of get a sense of what's going on. But I'm pretty skeptical of people who try to go too deep on like, this is what the format's going to look like. This is how it's going to play out. Because I think you're mostly just throwing darts at a dartboard. I don't really think that that's actually, like, sometimes you get it right and sometimes not. But like, I think that evaluating cards and being a little bit more influenced by the last couple sets is just kind of, that is a pretty natural way to go about it. And I like doing it. I know, like, when we have a set like LCI where like 1-drops are particularly good, we're a little higher on 1-drops in the next set. But that is all. There is also like these like patterns of in when it comes to design where that can also happen too. So
totally, and and it is interesting because as much as we've built this format as a slow format, it's not. It's just a middle. Like, it's not as slow as the slower formats that we've had on Arena since it's existed, where we can track these on 17 lands and stuff. But it just is a normal speed format. And I'm telling you, it's so much better here because it just opened up all these archetypes that wouldn't normally be there. And that was the big takeaway, by the way, from the biggest picture on the archetypes. Green-based decks were the best ones. There was a few other decks, black, red and stuff had a good run in the middle. But there was only one, like, kind of unplayable deck, like one deck that was really the basement and that was off of the main group, which was red-white, that's kind of right where I want it to be honest. The Fun Police was down in the basement. But anything above that, even if yes, there are better and worse archetypes, but they were in a very narrow spread. I remember when you first came back and we were talking about it, it was like 2.5% or something separated number 1 from number 9. I mean, this was a balanced format, even with green kind of running away with things as far as having the best commons.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked a lot about how format balance isn't like the only thing that matters. It's not even one of the biggest things, but it is better to have it than not. I think that is generally a desirable thing. And feeling like you can start in any color is pretty empowering, as opposed to like, well, we can't, you can't take a red card first pick. Otherwise you're being, you're making a mistake.
Right. We didn't have that type of situation. I mean, there were archetypes that I tried to avoid. I didn't like white in this format at all, and I basically would do anything to not play it, even though green-white ended up coming around and being pretty solid. I felt like I was at a big disadvantage every time I drafted white. Every other colors I was willing to do, but, again, it does feel really nice. Like, I feel that it's a result of the format being a step slower that we have the archetypes so close together, because it allows those mid-range decks to breathe a little bit. You know, the blue-red deck, it wasn't great. Like, it wasn't like the type of deck that you're like, oh, I got blue-red, here I go. It was like very uncommon dependent and needed a bunch of stuff to happen, but you could compete with it. Like, you could draft that deck and play it. It wasn't embarrassing. And that's all it really needs to do to be in that middle of the pack. Even if it's a little on the lower end, that's fine. It's within 1% or 2% of the top deck. You're all right. If it's open, you can draft it. If you know what's going on with the deck, you can make things happen. I lost to it yesterday, to a really sweet version of it. And that's all it really takes. It's just when those decks become like a joke that things are bad. You know, that's where it's like, hey, these aggro decks are really pushing out too much interesting design space.
So if things were like pretty balanced and there, you know, and there was a lot of different decks you could play, what ended up being like kind of the best build arounds or like the best strategies then?
Yeah, so it's interesting because for the most part, you know, especially for the green decks, there was some, I wouldn't call them build arounds. So I kind of have build arounds in 2 categories in my head. I have build arounds that accentuate things that you're already doing and or are good on their own and can supercharge other stuff. And then I have ones that are like more demanding. They say like, you need to be doing this thing or you shouldn't put this card in the deck. So like a good example would be, what is it called? Elvish. Man, how do I not know the names of these cards anymore? It's so bad.
It's because you don't do coverage of limited events.
Yeah, well, I did something. Whatever, the exhaust payoff. You know the one the 2-3 refueler.
The refueler, the one that you can just activate exhaust abilities
right.
A second time,
so like if you're doing the exhaust thing and you pick up an Elvish refueler, like it pours fuel on the fire, if you will. I mean, it is crazy what that card can do. But also if Elvish refueler's your only exhaust card, it's pretty good. Like 2 mana to put an extra +1/+1 counter on it every turn. You know, by the 3rd one, this thing's like bigger than most stuff on the battlefield. And if they haven't dealt with it, it does need to be killed. And that's pretty good. And it's really hard if you're in green to have just straight up no exhaust cards, right? Besides it. So, you know, it fits well. But then there's other cards, you know, that are more, I don't know, they're more demanding, right? Let me see if I can find a good example of one here. But, I know. Maybe the best build around card in the set, if you could make it work, is Push the Limit, right? The 5 red sorcery that brings back
all your vehicles, mounts, and just
and kill you, right? But the thing is, you couldn't just throw that card in. That isn't the type of card that you're like, well, it just makes
of a card you can't just put in your deck.
Yeah, it's 7 mana. It requires, you know, you getting vehicles and mounts literally into the graveyard. But there was a lot of support for that type of stuff, you know, and that to me was one of the standouts. My favorite was Reanimator. You know, the Broodheart engine, and then what is it called? Back on Track or whatever, you know, the black 5-drop, which is really good, by the way.
Reanimate pilot.
Yeah, you getting the extra pilot is like a total game changer for those kind of slow but maybe powerful cards, because they just let you like survive a little longer, or, you know, get in the vehicle that you got back or whatever. But that and Broodheart engine really did make like for some decent Reanimator stuff, especially when we have, you know, cards like Migrating Ketradon that cycle for so cheap and can come back, you know, with a powerful effect. So I really like that. The interesting thing to me is that this didn't feel like a heavy build around set. They were more in that range of the refueler type of cards, but that worked really well. It meant that there weren't quite as many like Push the Limit style cards to like really dream for late, where you're like, oh, we're going to open it. I'm going to do it. I'm first picking it. We're just going to force this. Let's see what happens. A little bit less of that stuff and a little bit more towards the decent card that kind of helps out other stuff. And if you put it all together, it can be strong. I would have liked to see a few more of those moonshot build around cards, because I just think that they're really good for late stage drafting when you're in draft 50 or 30 or whatever, where it's like, hey, this is something that I can try to do that's cool. And by the way, in my mind, the bad vehicles have all replaced like cool build arounds. So I just have totally blamed vehicles for like everything that I'm, you know, that I'd change in the set somehow. But anyway, this wasn't a heavy build around set. I wish it actually leaned into it more. That would probably put it into like all-timer status. It's not quite there for me, but yeah. But those are some of the better build-arounds. Push the Limit was a cool one too.
Yeah, Push the Limit seemed really sweet. I chatted a little with Ben S when he after he went 8-0 and like just talking with him about draft. He seemed to like the format quite a bit, and like, you know, the fact that Push the Limit is like the kind of card you can actually play in some decks. I really like in formats where there's these like one card decks that you have to know about, and if you know about them, you can really get something out. You know, get some great value.
Totally.
So, at the end of the day, though, what were the best cards? What was like the biggest grown test, the bombiest bomb? What were the cards you like? You know, when your opponent played it, you're just like, God damn it.
Yeah, for grown test, I would say Pyrewood Gear Hulk, which, you know, has an overrun style effect. It is the type of card that can take you from a board that you feel pretty confident about winning, or that you feel is fully stabilized, to you being dead in one turn. So that's the type of card, you know, that can kill you out of nowhere, and it's a mythic. So like you don't see it very often. It would be difficult to play around that type of thing. As far as the bombiest bomb, it was Sabsunin.
Oh, I played against that one.
Dude, I mean, we gave it an A+. Like, we were just like, what is this? But when you play it, it is so stupid. I mean, it is so stupid to play against this card, mainly because they gave it indestructible on top of, you know, all the other abilities, where it's just like there's a huge chunk of removal that just doesn't do anything, and the rest, you know, feels like a stopgap. That card, I never opened it. Never opened it. I would have taken it over, you know, pack 3 if I was in red black, and I never opened it. But I did get to taste just once what it was like to have a Sabsunin, because I played Possession Engine and I stole it.
Oh yeah, that's a nice one too.
Yeah. So I did get a little bit, but yeah, Sabsunin was definitely the bombiest bomb. There were a couple of other notables. Mu Yanling was very strong, and Justin Blue. And another one that was within, like, I mean, you know, on any given day, it may have even been the best card in the set, which was Loot, which is
Loot.
Great.
Loot's been good in Vintage Cube.
Has it really? I was wondering. I figured you guys would come flocking once you saw Ancestral Recall on some other thing, you know.
Yeah, Lightning Bolt, Ancestral Recall, and like Super Dark Ritual, all very good.
Yeah. Interesting. Most interesting thing, we liked it. Paul and I both like Loot a lot. We were like, look, if you can get this card in your deck, it is amazing. And it has been. But the cool part about it is that it occupies that slot, you know, second best card in the set, whatever. It's way high, and it's 3 colors. You know, and this still didn't end up being a set that is going to be well known for being multicolor. That really wasn't the thing. You could do it. There was enough fixing and stuff that you could mess around. But generally speaking, that wasn't like core to what was going on. And even then, Loot ended up being, you know, one of the best cards. So that's pretty cool.
So one of the things that's kind of funny is looking at the best cards in a set doesn't necessarily inform you that much about the set itself. Like, it can. Mm-hmm. If I told you that 15 mana Emrakul is one of the best cards in the set, you'd be like, oh, okay, what's going on with that? Why is that the case?
Right. How are they cheating that into play?
Right. But most of the time, when you look at like what is the best card in the set, like, yeah, this Gear Hulk, that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting that most of the time the best card in the set is just going to be, you know, some 5 or 6 mana, very impactful, like mythic sort of deal.
And I should say, I know I picked Sabsunin. The by the numbers best card in the set was Lumbering Worldwagon, which is 3 mana.
Another card that's good in Vintage Cube.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah. And, you know, and so, you know, if you could pick any card to open, technically it would be Lumbering Worldwagon, easier to cast, cheaper, 1 color, etc. But I mean, Sabsunin, come on. Like, you ever seen that thing on the battlefield? The game ends real quick.
Yeah. It's pretty funny that it used to be that the best cards in the set were always like 6 mana, you know, dragon sort of deals. Mm-hmm. Typically, I would say now that the best cards in the set are like mostly going to be a 3 or 4 mana play, because there's every now and then there's these like 3 or 4 mana plays that end up just being really strong.
Yeah, for sure.
So moving on from the best cards in the set, what were the best commons in each color?
So this was probably the most interesting setup that we've had in a while. White, it makes sense. It was Ride's End. So white's best removal spell. Okay, that makes sense. Blue was really interesting. It was Bounce Off. like Unsummon is somehow the best blue common. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's not, I wouldn't say that's typical.
It's better than Flood the Engine, which was more or less a hard removal spell in blue in this format. I mean, wow. I'm always a proponent of cheap interaction, and I've always been, not always, but I've been ahead of the curve on liking cheap bounce spells in formats where you need to be able to deal with stuff, but I still wouldn't have Bounce Off, or these type of cards that high up. So that was an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, especially if like people are like accruing vehicles and you can bounce a vehicle and end up getting like pretty far ahead on tempo. But
yeah.
It also, I would say this is a pattern that also tends to repeat. Blue is often one of the better colors that it has its time in the sun. I'm not going to say blue doesn't, but frequently blue does not have the best commons. Like blue typically, like red is like the opposite. Red is actually more, I think, someone would like Syracuse would have to actually like look it up, but I would bet that blue's been a better color than red more in the last like 5 years. Red typically has, red's best commons are usually better than blue's best commons, even when blue is quite a bit better than red overall. Also, because blue's best commons don't look quite as on their face appealing as reds typically do. Lightning Strike, like Bounce Off versus Lightning Strike, or in this case, well, Thunderhead Gunner is actually a different story. I want to talk about that when we get to it. But I just think it's funny that red is, I think, stronger at common than it looks, or blue's stronger even though it looks bad at common, and red's often weak even though it looks good at common.
Yeah. For black, I have Pactol Terror as the best black common, though technically it's Grim Bobble. That performed better on 17 lands, but I think Pactol Terror was the more impactful, more important card. It was the crux of any black artifact deck. It's playable in anything. It's just a good card, but if you could get the artifact thing going with it, it was a problem. I mean, this card, adds up a lot of damage over the course of time. And for a common, that's really impressive. But again, Grim Bobble, maybe not that surprising. I don't know. A cheap removal spell, sure. A little weird that there's so much cheap interaction that matters here. Like, is that the reason that the format's slow? Because you would think in a slower format that cheap interaction wouldn't be as critical. So I don't know, maybe that I just have the cart in front of the horse here or something. Like maybe it's because of Bounce Off, Grim Bobble, and Ride's End that we're able to have a format that's a step slower.
You eat your vegetables, so you get to you get to have ice cream.
Yeah, next one. I mean, this is definitely the most shocking out of all of them, which is Thunderhead Gunner over Lightning Strike. Like, what happened? How many 5-drop commons, Luis, have we read over the years where we're just like, looks good, C-, looks good, D, right? Like these, and again, for the reasons I talked about earlier by putting it on my little litmus test, is that if you're the one with the 5-drop, it's very difficult when it gets killed for you to be the one who's ahead in that exchange. Yet somehow Thunderhead Gunner, I mean, every other color, it's like cheap removal spells best. And red has arguably the best cheap removal spell out of all of them, and it still didn't make it to number one. It is the second best, but it's like almost a percentage point below the Gunner. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the first time I saw Thunderhead Gunner, my opponent played it. And and then they immediately discarded a land and drew another card. And then I couldn't attack into it. And then I'm like, wow. I literally had this thought. I wonder what those guys gave it in the set review, because I bet I wouldn't have given this a very high grade, and this card looks awesome.
Yeah.
It was just really funny. Like,
so it was weird because I don't remember what we gave it, but basically I remember thinking, this is pushed, but we've seen pushed 5-drop commons, and I'm not falling for the trap. That's kind of what I was thinking. And it turns out it wasn't a trap. It was just great. It had good synergies, right, with some of the decks that cared about that stuff, but it was just good on its own. There was no deck that could cast red mana that didn't want Thunderhead Gunner. Yeah, really excellent card. My theory is that it has the two things that are really good for a format like this. One of them is that it's huge and has reach, so it helps you continue to stay and or get to the very late game. And then B, it helps you in the late game because you just never run out of gas anymore. Like anytime you draw a land, you just immediately pitch it and get something better. And so this is kind of the late game killer, right? This is the queen. This is the one that comes out and is like, I can do all the things that you care about to get you to the late game and to keep you there and help you win when you're there. And then green, Stampeding Scurryfoot.
Yeah, what a card.
What a card. It's just a
It reminds me of Call of the Herd, but
like a mini
Call
version.
of the Herd that now is common and better.
Right. And I mean, and green had some serious competition, right? Run Over, Migrating Ketrodon, Hazard of the Dunes, Beast Rider Vanguard, Pothole Mole, all excellent. Veloheart Bike becoming a more late stage playable, but still good. And then there's Venom Sac Lagak that we talked about, and then some other stuff like the Omnivore, Bestow Greatness, etc. But yeah, the Scurryfoot, that was the one, it turns out. I would have had a hard time predicting that. But again, it's the best common, not only in green, but in the entire format. It is excellent. I mean, when you read it, you're like, dang. Like the thing that stood out to me in week one, after we realized how good it was, I talked to Paul about it. I was like, why does it get a +1/+1 counter?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
did they really want to get that over the line? Like, what's
right.
going
It's
on?
like you get an elephant for freaking sake. Like you don't need extra. And somebody was just like, all right, we got to do it. So yeah, that's how the comments broke down. Cheap removal, cheap removal, cheap removal. Although I like Pact Altair a little bit better. Then random 5-drop just over cheap removal. And then the best 1-drop threat at common, the Scurryfoot.
So when it comes to uncommons, though, what ended up being the actual mythic uncommon? Was there like a standout one? Because some formats don't have that.
There wasn't. It was weird. When this came up, I was like, no. I looked it up to see like what performed the best, and it was like Thundering Broodwagon, which was excellent. But I will say that no, there was not one uncommon for me that just stood out head and shoulders, or that you're like, oh, I did it. I mean, honestly, it would be a card like Stock Up or Transit Mage or something like that. Like those cards I really, really liked. There were some good gold cards, that were good. The Broodwagon, the Thrill Seeker. Apparently Embalmed Descendant is quite high on the list. I didn't realize that. I'm just looking now. So, I love Sky Serpent Seeker, the exhaust flying death touch guy. So there was a lot to like. Spike Shell Harrier. That's, we're not going to do Martialist card this time, but that would have been it. So there's a bunch of really good stuff, but no, I do not have any card I don't believe that there was a mythic uncommon for this set. It was kind of like, you might have a favorite, but there was no Vampire Nighthawk and Zendikar or whatever, right? Where it was just like clearly the best thing.
Speaking of the Spike Shell Harrier, what is your feeling about referencing the Mario, the blue shell, the Mario Kart blue shell in
is
in
that
Magic
what that
here?
was? Oh, I don't like it.
You didn't know?
I didn't even get that reference.
Yeah, that slows them down if they're ahead. It's just like the blue shell, which is funny because Hearthstone also in Battlegrounds has a card like that too. It's a blue shell turtle that sells for more if you've lost your last fight.
That's really embarrassing that I didn't notice that. I don't like it. It even looks like it. God, maybe I should just
people don't probably hear or on your watch channel for your pop culture takes exactly. Also,
I mean, the picture looks just like it.
You're one of the least online people I know, which is great.
I try really hard because
complimentary.
I have been more online than I am now, and I like it better this way. I don't like it. Keep your cheap pop culture references away from my hardcore card game.
Yeah, no time for fun here. This is Magic.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. See, you get it.
So I would normally fill this out. This time you had to. I really wasn't able to. What is the most begrudgingly playable card?
I'm carrying the burden because I couldn't let this one. We have a streak going. And the most begrudgingly playable is Glitch Ghost Surveyor, which is a 3-mana 2/2 flyer with like the most marginal upside you could put on it.
Yeah, it's if you have max speed, you can cycle it from your graveyard.
Yeah, exactly. For 3 mana, by the way. But it has no home. Like there is no max speed blue deck that's just like, gotta have the Glitch Ghost Surveyor. And the exhaust deck would rather pay for exhaust rather than getting this stupid thing out of the yard. It just isn't a card that any deck actually wants, but it's just enough on stats that you're like, sure, I guess I'll play this random Glitch Ghost Surveyor because why not? So the streak lives. I can't claim victory like you can, but this is definitely in that sweet spot.
And what about a soapboxiest card?
Okay, so there's two. The first, which we'll save for the next section where we talk about the mechanics, because this kind of fits into that category, and it's vehicles. I mean, that's definitely the thing I was soapboxing about.
I'm with you there. I've kind of made that my position clear on vehicles.
Yeah, it was funny because I've been talking about it that way, and then when you came back, it was like, boom, I'm like, yep, he's on the same page as I am. But one interesting card that I didn't soapbox on it after the set review, but I did kind of hop up there for a little while in the set review, and I was wrong about it, is the Aether Spark. And when we reviewed it, I think I just kind of had enough with gimmicks. Right? Like this is the type line on this card. Legendary artifact planeswalker equipment. Like this is just so obviously people, just taking card types and going,
what if we made,
what if, right? Yeah. What if a planeswalker equipment artifact? It's like, come on, you're trying too hard, right? There's nothing natural about this. It doesn't click. Like when I see that, I don't think, oh, like an artifact equipment planeswalker. I've been waiting for this. It's like, why? Like somebody tried too hard. It was kind of my vibe. And then reading the card, my first impression was this is extremely strange and doesn't seem very good. But after Paul and I kind of talked about it, we were like, no, this actually does seem good, but really weird. And we bumped our grade, even in the set review, like before we were even done with the card, we were kind of coming up on it. But I gotta say that while the part I said about, trying, like this feels forced to me to try to like the what if thing, maybe there's something to that, because this card plays out really interesting, powerful, and cool. And I really liked it. It stood out to me. It had a big impact on the game. It was powerful, but not like so dominant that you're just like, this is stupid, I can't do anything. It was interesting in that it was a card type that like normally you could attack, but if it was attached, you couldn't. So it kind of like your opponent could leverage their removal in a really great way. But like if they couldn't, it kind of ran wild. As a card, like as a mechanical card, it was really interesting, really powerful, and it really worked. So even though I'm a little bit bah humbug about just like, putting a bunch of card types into a random generator and just spitting them out, maybe there's something to it because it leads to interesting designs that maybe you wouldn't have found before. And the Aether Spark to me is one of them. So even though I soapboxed on it, like I'm jumping off of the soapbox and being like, okay, maybe I should let the designers of cards design cards, and I just sort of take them at face value because I was definitely wrong about this one.
Well, I think first of all, I think it's great that you're willing to step off the soapbox. I think a lot of hot take merchants are not very interested in doing that. Mm-hmm. But also I think, I think it's good to like, yes, I agree with you. You look at Aether Spark and you're like, this is some ridiculous gimmick, but it's good to play with the card and be like, no, actually this does work. This is cool. I like this. So I think that there is value in both of them, but obviously they make plenty of mistakes, or at least do things that we think are not good or kind of weird. And it's totally fine, I think, for you to soapbox, if that's the sort of thing that you want to do.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, that's part of having a podcast is kind of, and also voicing one viewpoint on Magic, right? I like competitive play and I like limited, right? And I've been playing for a while. So whatever that voice is worth, that's what I'm saying. And I think it's worth saying in this type of context. But like I said, I mean, Aetherspark's cool, man. It just is cool. I got really lucky. I think I opened it more than any other mythic. I just kept getting it, and it's really powerful and colorless. So like you get to play it every single time, no matter what. Hey, Jewel Dog. And
sure.
Yeah, anyway, so that was the other one that I soapbox. And then my real soapbox though, and that I still am on is vehicles. And we'll talk about that in the next section.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to kind of tackle the next section a little bit, which is the design development kind of breakdown. So looking at the mechanics, like how did they fare? What were the wins? What were the losses?
Julie has something to say about it. So let's just go mechanic by mechanic, because some of them are simple and relatively straightforward, and some of them are a little bit more. We'll start with start your engines, which to me, I think it falls below the bar for me on complexity versus payoff, meaning that I like mechanics that are a light touch. And start your engines in some ways was in that it benefited you from doing something that you wanted to do anyway, attack your opponent or have them lose life.
The landfall principle.
Exactly. And those are cool. Like landfall is the best example of that. And start your engines is in that same category. The downside, I think, is that it is a little bit unintuitive. It's another thing to track. It also it oversells itself a little bit to me. It sounds exciting. It has exclamation points. It has words like max speed. When you think, if I told you there's a 4-step process to get to something called max speed in the next set, I think you would assume that when you did get there, it would be pretty crazy. Like you'd be getting some awesome stuff going. And that wasn't the case with start your engines. I think that was appropriate. Like I would have been bummed if they're like, hey, look, you attack your opponent and now all your stuff gets way better. It's like a win more type mechanic or something that, adds to victory that was already coming. That isn't very interesting. This did not do that. But the way that they tuned it was just to say, okay, your guy gets +1/+1. Or now it has menace or something, right? Little tiny benefits, not that many payoffs. There was only really one at the uncommon and common slot, the 5/4 for 4 and a black that spits out a zombie. And basically all the rest weren't like cards or board material coming to you in a meaningful way. It was small upsides here and there. The common cycle that was like, oh, now you can cycle me from the graveyard for 3. It's like, what? That's barely a payoff at all. So to me, start your engines missed, but not by a lot. And I am appreciative of the fact that they went a little bit conservative with the payoffs, because I do think that if it was good, it would just be this snowball mechanic that just, it just feels like, yeah, I was ahead. I leveraged it to get my engines at max speed, and now I just won the game easily. Like that's not very interesting.
Yeah, I think that missing low is better than missing high in a lot of cases. I mean, you want a range. Like sometimes it's better to do one, sometimes it's better to do the other. But here it does seem, and this is by my experience as well, that they kind of missed low on it in a way that's like mostly inoffensive. Like, yeah, it makes some cards better. It doesn't change what you do too much. I've had some games where you throw away a creature to get the speed to 4 or whatever. But for the most part, I think that this mechanic was pretty forgettable. Like it less impactful than you would think it was. This is the racing set. It's called Start Your Engines. You're getting to max speed. Sounds like earth-shattering, and they really kind of restrained themselves and maybe too much. I don't know. To where now it's like, yeah, your 3/3 for 3 that you were playing. Now you can cycle it out of your graveyard if you want. Right. It's not particularly that exciting.
Right. I think it's a little bit of a flawed space to do game design in. It has something there. They did something with it, but it's just capped. It's just you just can't reward somebody who's already winning the game that much. That doesn't really make sense.
That's the tough part about it, is that like snowball mechanics can be pretty unfun, and that is certainly the risk with something like this.
Yeah. Ooh, but the next one I loved. This is my favorite mechanic from the set, and it shows that you don't need to reinvent the wheel to make something that's good, powerful, interesting, flexible, and that was Exhaust. Exhaust is like, how has this not existed yet? Right? Like this just feels like every other mechanic ever, basically, which is like pay some mana, get a thing. but you can only do it once. Like that was the big innovation here. It's like, whatever, like that. I don't know. It's not even that interesting, and it doesn't have to be, because any mechanic that allows you to deploy something and then use it later is interesting and good, because of that fundamental design principle of when do you do it? How do you pull it off? Are you building towards that goal? Do you wait until you can cast a thing and do it right now? And it just leads to much more interesting gameplay to have stuff to do now and stuff to do later. And Exhaust was a perfectly reasonable little slice to experiment in, where you get to just do it the one time.
I mean, I think it's a perfect example of execution mattering, where, yeah, Exhaust in some ways, you got to be surprised that they didn't do something like Exhaust earlier. This is like one of the cleanest implementations of this sort of mechanic. But, you know, as it turns out, like, they just made some really simple, appealing Exhaust cards, and
they did.
That's kind of all it took, you know.
That's it. And this is one where there isn't that. They have so many knobs that they can turn on this as far as price and outcome go, that, you know, they can make it where you have to tap the thing. They can make it where you don't, so it could be a surprise or whatever. They can make it sorcery speed or not. They can make it any amount of mana or other costs that they want to put in, and they can give you whatever effect you want. They could have had a mythic Exhaust card that was, you know, pay all this mana and you get a 20/20 and, you know, whatever. Or they can have it be like Exhaust 2, gain a life, or so, you know, they can just do whatever they want. And that's so much great space. And, you know, the designers are so well seasoned at this point about stuff like this that they just nailed it. I mean, they were different, they were interesting, they were color specific. And I would not be sad at all to just see Exhaust become an evergreen mechanic that we just see pop up.
Oh, I'm sure it's going to. Like, I just think that the cards played so well. And again, you do have to give credit that a lot of this is that they made the cards just simple and fun, and like those were good designs. That isn't necessarily going to be true the next time we see Exhaust cards, but I still think it was such a triumph that I would be shocked if we didn't see more of it.
Same. Saddles and mounts was a thing here. These play, but they've never been interesting to me. I guess they're just a checkbox. Like, sure, you can saddle up a creature and it gets a little better. I prefer them to vehicles mostly, so maybe that's the angle. But they've just never really captured my attention. It does work though. I find it inoffensive. It's like, oh, cool. But that's about it. Like, I just don't find it interesting. There's not really that much to build around there. It's kind of just combat centric. So again, I would just give saddles and mounts saddle mechanic just a checkbox. It's like, fine. And then cycling was on here too. Sorry, did you want to say something about mounts?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think that they're a cleaner implementation of vehicles. I do like them more than vehicles for that reason. But I also don't think that like saddles and mounts are like, again, something to base a whole set off of.
Right.
Like, that's not where I would go with that. But yeah, I think that they play very nicely. Like, it being sorcery speed, giving you a little boost when there's someone, you know, riding on your war links. That's cool. That's a totally fine card. It works. It works if you're not being able to saddle it. You're not getting these weird priority passes. Like, you know, I know that they just have to bite the bullet on some of this stuff, but on Arena, when your opponent has a vehicle out that you know they're not going to crew for any real reason, and they just have to press OK 7 extra times over a turn cycle, like, yeah, that's not ideal, you know.
Definitely, it is also clunky, to do. And then there was cycling in this set. You know, there was a blue-red deck that cared about it. There was a few uncommon payoffs that cared about discarding or, you know, doing cycling type stuff. But I think I like it when cycling is in a set in general, but I don't necessarily need there to be cards that are geared towards it. I could take it or leave it. So cycling, thumbs up, sure, keep it in there. But that leaves the last mechanic, in this case, card type, which we've been, you know, talking about a lot, which is vehicles. And I mean, I think I'm just done with them for the most part. Like, if they just never made any more, I wouldn't be sad. I think the most I would do at this point is leave room for vehicles that were specifically interesting or that was necessary to tell a story, or, that would be just a really cool one-off addition to a set and make them rare or something like that. But, I feel like it's run its course in the sense that there's just no more basic vehicles to go for, and those would be deemed too boring. It's like, oh, it's a motorcycle, it's a car, it's a helicopter, it's a flying, thing like an airplane. These have all been done. And the idea of going back to those doesn't really make sense because it's just not interesting design space anymore. And now when we go down the road of trying to twist vehicles into becoming playable with knobs that aren't really on the vehicle at all, like it becomes a creature on its own. It's like, well, that's just a creature. Like we don't need it to be a vehicle then. That type of stuff feels like we're stretching. We're trying to make vehicles happen. And while there was some interesting design space here, I'm kind of ready just to say goodbye. And I'll say one thing. I would definitely not revisit a set that was heavily vehicle centric like this. The vehicles were, in my mind, mostly a flop and not that exciting.
Yeah, I can't argue with you there. It's not like I'm a great vehicle enjoyer myself.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll say that playing the set, it wasn't really offensive. It was more just like missed opportunity. I just look at all those slots that are vehicle slots and I'm like, that could have been a cool card. And instead it's this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do think that there's something interesting about a card type that's like halfway a creature, but not interesting enough to design an entire set around it. So I would give vehicles a thumbs down. In this set, there was a couple that hit, but to me, you can look at, I mentioned this before, but I put the vehicles into two categories. I put them into stats only vehicles and vehicles that act more like a spell and leave you the vehicle left over. And the stats only vehicles are just almost all unplayable. And the spell vehicles are bent, twisted, and pushed to try to be good or playable. And they don't really remind you of the core vehicle card type very much anymore. This just sort of like board pieces, extra material. And that's, those can be anything. They don't have to be vehicles.
So when all is said and done though, where were you, what grade would you give the set? Where does this land for you?
Yeah. I mean, as far as takeaways from the set, having it be slower was really great. It was really great. Like seriously. And this is not a slow set, by the way. Like that, we kind of rejoice because we've been starved for anything that would let us get to the mid to late game in some percentage of the time. And this did that. So it feels slow compared, but it's not even close to the slowest formats we've had on Arena. But having it just be slower by a step is great. Like seriously, this is what I want. I want all my sets to be like this with the occasional fast set and the occasional slow set, but I want this. This is what I felt like I could explore the space, the design space of this set put in front of me and not feel like I was a sucker for doing so. And it meant that I didn't have that anxious feeling in the early part of the game where, oh crap, I lost the die roll. I'm now 54% my opponent has to win the game because that happened. And you feel it. Like you definitely feel it when that happens, particularly if they go 1 drop, 2 drop, and you don't have a 1 or 2. Like it feels like it's over. And that is not a good feeling at all. So I really like this. Interesting takeaway though. You did not get to take the early turns off in Aetherdrift. It was not like the old school slow sets where it was like, don't even play a 2 drop. Like you're just wasting your time. In this set, you needed to play those early cards, but they had to fill one of 2 roles. They either had to be good defensive cards that were keeping you from dying, because people are still playing cards that matter. Like if you don't do anything, you still get killed, even if it wasn't like an all-out aggressive type deck. And 2, and perhaps more interestingly, you needed to play cards early that set you up for the late game, cards that created mana or advantages that you could take advantage of later down the game. And so there was still this pressure on you to do stuff. It's just that the pressure was to set up for your late game, not to try to kill your opponent ASAP. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the other one, this is kind of an ode to exhaust, but having, because there's others too, but having simple mana sinks that just matter in limited is interesting and fun. It's just that simple, 2 drops that you pay 5 to get a card later, and actually having those be a relevant card, not the best card in the set, but relevant, were interesting. The last thing that I wanted to say as far as takeaways go, and this is what I'm kind of sad you missed out on, Luis, is somehow Millstone is like one of the best cards in the set.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? I guess we're talking about River Churn Monument. I guess it's just because of the exhaust, turboing it, where you kind of only needed to get halfway and then you could exhaust the rest to just win the game on the spot. But we gave it a D or an F. 1 and a blue, 1 tap, anybody mill, any number of players mill 2, and then exhaust 2 blue tap. They mill equal to any number of people mill equal to their graveyard size. These type of cards have been just laughably bad, and somehow this one ended up being good. And I mean good, actually good, And the other one was Ether Siphon, the 1 blue 2 tap draw a card would start your engines. And then if you get max speed, whenever you draw a card, it mills them for 2. That ended up being pretty good. That's an uncommon. And that one was fun. Was a rare. It was pretty good too. But those are, I'm still baffled by the monument, just how, even in this format where it's relatively slow, that's still a lot to ask. I guess it's just the exhaust part that, pushed it over the top. But anyway, those were cards I wanted to give shout out to. As far as grade, I would give Aetherdrift an A-. I really liked it. This format was very well balanced, had allowed you to play the cards that were put into it, and the gameplay and the draft were both above average. I would say they were B to B plus range, but it's hard to combine all of those things to me. And even with, the vehicles thing kind of detracting a little bit because there was kind of a lot of dead cards, I would give it an A-. I thought this format was excellent, just not quite on that all-timer level.
Yeah, that's high praise, and I've seen similar sentiments among other folks as well. So it seems like the set really did hit its marks. I
did have a favorite card.
Oh, what was that?
So you would think that it might be the Super Mario Brothers card or whatever, or they tried, Luis. They really tried to get me on board with vehicles. They printed Hull Drifter. That's, if I'm ever going to love a vehicle, that would be it. And I'm kind of this is really a testament to keeping open-minded, I guess. But my favorite card in the format was the Ether Spark.
All right.
It was awesome, super interesting. And every time I opened it, not just for power level, I was like, sweet. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever picked a mythic either to be my favorite card, but it was the Ether Spark.
Yeah, it's a sweet card. That one we did also try in Vintage Cube. I have equipped the Ether Spark myself. Ended up not being good enough, but it was still pretty sweet. Yeah,
I think the ultimately the thing that I really ended up liking about it was that it was a Planeswalker that really, really cared about combat. You being able to battle and making an interesting decision point there, where normally they care about combat in the sense of can I be attacked, but this one actually cared about you getting into combat, which I thought was kind of an interesting twist for a Planeswalker. Okay. You want to call it a show there, Luis? Any other last words on Ether Spark?
No, it's just going to be for kind of my dead zone of sets, but that's okay. That happens,
Yeah. You can use it as leverage against the Twins one day. I missed Aether Spark for this, or Aetherdrift for this.
Why couldn't I have missed Bloomborough instead?
Yeah, exactly.
Or better yet, New Phyrexia or whatever it was called. I don't even know the name of the set. I dislike it so much.
Yeah, ONE.
Phyrexia all is one.
Yeah, that's the one. All right, let's call it a show there. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find us on social media. Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. Pretty much everywhere you can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. And we want to thank our sponsor, Ultimate Guard, as well as our supporters on Patreon for supporting the show. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So if you follow the news, you probably heard about the group chat leak where an Atlantic reporter was added to like a top secret group chat.
Yes, at the highest government level.
Really, truly very ridiculous of a thing to happen. But it made me think of various misadventures in that space when it comes to magic testing, because we've had some. Before I start, who do you think is serious? Who do you think is the most likely to have leaked some of our deck information inadvertently? It was on Team CFB for a long time.
Ben Stark.
Wow, you nailed it in one. So he's certainly the person who's done it the most. Who do you think has done it the second most? It's a trick question. It's also Ben Stark.
Oh, it's also Ben Stark.
So the first one is when he posted. So Ben had his responsibility for quite some time as a member of Team CFB to write up his thoughts on Limited and talk to us about Limited. Like we basically even didn't care whether he tested Constructed, as long as he was giving us some good Limited information. And Ben writes up his Limited write up, and we're like, great, this is awesome, Ben, thank you. And the thing is, he posted it on Facebook. He didn't post it to our team forum. Because this is back when our team group was on Facebook. So he posts this on Facebook and is just like, everyone can see it. He deletes it, but all the other, Magic players he's friends with on Facebook who are also playing at the Pro Tour did in fact see.
Oh my God.
And it was like his whole breakdown of like Theros Limited, which, okay, sure, that's not the end of the world. Ben also, when at one point messaged Paul Rietzel with a bunch of cards that he needed when Paul wasn't on our team anymore. and Paul was like,
can I reverse engineer this?
Well, so there was a card. I don't even remember the name anymore. It's so bad. It's like, it was a Minotaur. It was 2 and a red for a 2/2 haste. And when it entered the battlefield, it got +2/+0 this turn.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
It's from the Theros. It was our for our mono red devotion deck, it was our sideboard card against control decks. They'd Wrath and you'd play this and hit them for 4. Really bad card. And I think Paul was just so secondhand embarrassed by the fact that Ben asked him for 60, Talroom Skull Crushers or whatever it was called.
Was it Minotaur Skull Cleaver?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And he was like, Ben, I'm not on your team. You shouldn't be messaging this. Also, I don't really want to know why you need 60 of this really bad card. We did terrible that tournament. But there have been other such leaks. One that happened a long time ago that was really funny is, Zach Hill, of course. Oh yeah. You did tons of coverage with him, worked at Wizards, all that stuff. There was also a professional Magic player named Zach Hall. I don't know if you remember him, but he was around for a bit. Mm-hmm. At one point, Zach Hill, who was playing in the Pro Tour, got messaged by Big Oots, Rasmus Sebest is the guy's name from Denmark, a deck and a list, but they're not on the team. And he's like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, I thought you were on our testing team. And this is like right before the Pro Tour. Zach's like, no, I'm not. Turns out Zach Hall was on his team and Big Oots just didn't know the difference between those two people and just messaged Zach Hill with their deck list.
Oh, big whoops is more like it.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
But on the other hand, sometimes coverage causes a leak. I don't know if you remember the blue-green Karn debacle, but
oh, yeah.
So Team CFB, we played a blue-green Karn deck. This deck was really bad. It was actually maybe if not the worst deck I've ever played, in the bottom 3, and certainly one of the most embarrassing. And so we're playing this deck, and this deck had Virtuous Gearhulk, it had Karn, Walking Ballista. It was like a blue-green artifact deck. Mm-hmm. This is back when red-black with Chandra, Glorybringer, and all that. stuff was like the best deck, right? The Braid and all that, Goblin Chain Whirler. That was the deck we should have played, of course. Mm-hmm. So we register this, and 10 of us do or 8 of us do. Some of us are smart and just don't register it. I, of course, did register it. And then coverage on day one puts up decks. Here's some sample decks from the PT. We're not going to say who's playing them, but it was like stock red-black, stock blue-white, stock white weenie, and this Karn deck that I think coverage didn't realize because 10 people played it, it wasn't a stock deck. This was just our deck. And everyone's like, oh, look at this list. It was like, It was so demoralizing because not only were we going to lose anyway because our deck sucked, we couldn't even trick people with any of our plans or any of the weird cards we had. It was just metallic rebukes and stuff. It was just I know what's going on there. But I do want to say that I did play against BK in my only PT match against him in the 75 card blue-green Karn mirror, and I did emerge victorious.
Wow, nice. You got the most important win.
But if you get added any group chats, then get ready. So some fun memories there.